Also, I had a nice message from Busho Lan saying how much he enjoyed being here. He said it was such a great group, engaged, and that he really had a nice time, and he watched the video and was very pleased with how it turned out. He said it was fun to watch, so that was cool. Next week, we don't have class because of the Jewish holiday of Purim.
But you can come and hear the Gil.
You can come. If you come here next Wednesday night, there will be people dressed up in costumes and
We always look like
reading. We're going to read the book of Esther. That's the book of, the story of Purim actually comes from the book of Esther. And there's all kinds of hijinks and goofing around. And
But that's
So-
at 6, not 7.
it's at 6, right, yeah, that's right. It's at 6 rather than 7. And then there's a party on Sunday at 5:30, a Purim party.
that. That'll be fun.
Yeah, there'll be magicians and food. It's a really fun holiday, so.
They say that you're supposed to drink so much that you can't tell the difference between long live Mordecai and down with Haman.
Like the good guy and the bad guy, you can't tell the difference, yeah. So there's a long history of drinking on Purim too. I know, here we've had, was that here or was that in Chicago where we had beer on Purim?
Beer.
Beer.
It's also the only time in the Orthodox communities when they'll trans-dress.
Oh,
Rabbis who
really?
come in dressed like their wives, they're the shidel, and it's
Oh,
really
yeah.
funny. It's the only time of year they're allowed to do
They-
that.
That's
cross-dressing.
funny.
It's
Last year
strange.
Sharon's husband, who's a judge, was dressed as a judge, and Sharon was dressed as a prisoner. With
You
hand,
never want to go online and go in with toy handcuffs. You do.
No, you don't.
you can't, yeah.
Oh.
What am I bargaining for?
So tonight we're going to talk about Hinduism. So next week we're off, and then we're going to pick up with Christianity on whatever that would be, March 11th, I think it would be.
So are we having a Hindu person coming, or?
No, and it worked out really well, because when they would have been coming is next
Next
week.
week.
So, and it just fell through, so sometimes things work out as they should.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll have one on Christianity, then we'll have our Christian speaker, and then we'll do Islam, and we'll do our Islamic guest, and then we've got 1 week at the end, and we can decide what we want to do with that. I will take votes on what you want to do. There's various traditions we could cover. So Hinduism, I brought along my little friend Ganesha, who is one of the hundreds of thousands of deities that are recognized within Hinduism. We're going to be talking a lot about that tonight. Ganesha is an elephant head deity. You can pass it around, you can see his trunk. He's got one broken tusk, which happened in some sort of an epic battle. And Ganesha represents new beginnings, new endeavors, but also is connected with like study and pursuits like that. So he's a very, very good symbol for us here, and he lives on my desk at home, next to my Buddha. So Hinduism, now if you recall when we were talking about the history of the various religious traditions, and we said that, how old is Judaism? Anybody remember? About 4,000 years. How old are our indigenous traditions?
Older than that.
Older than dirt, right? I mean, we have no idea, right? Now, Hinduism is said to be about 5,000 years old. Now, kind of like Judaism, does anybody know really that Hinduism is 5,000 years old? No, but that is the tradition. It's probably the most complex religious tradition on earth, the most varied, the most diverse. You can find within Hinduism pretty much every style of worship imaginable, which makes it absolutely fascinating, but also kind of hard to get your arms around because there's a lot there. So now the term Hinduism, it did not come into being until the 19th century. Okay, so this is not a term that people who practice this tradition applied to themselves. It is actually a term that came from the British, who of course ruled India until our friend Gandhi helped get that overturned. We'll talk about that later. But that's a British census-taking term. So they were taking a census, and everyone who wasn't a Christian, a Buddhist, a Muslim, or a Jainist was put together under the heading of Hindu, which refers to the Indus River. It's kind of a term that was involved in the tradition, but it's kind of an artificial term. However, there are characteristics that we can point to that is a commonality amongst all those who do fall under this name. The preferred term for those who practice this tradition, although they've taken to calling themselves Hindus too. I mean, I'm sure many of you know Hindu people who do refer to themselves that way. But there are those who prefer to use the term Sanatana Dharma. Now, remember this from last week when we were talking about Buddhism? It's a Sanskrit term. So Sanskrit is a language of Hinduism, but it's also one of the two languages that's used in the Buddhist scriptures, Pali and Sanskrit. So Dharma means, huh?
Knowledge?
Yeah, knowledge, teachings, kind of like the way, kind of like halacha. Sanatana means eternal. So they refer to themselves as the followers, in a sense, of the eternal way or the eternal teachings. And some scholars actually do prefer this, but for our purposes, we're going to use Hindu. And do you remember in the past, you read old books, it was sometimes written that way. You don't see that anymore, but once in a while, from the 19th century, early 20th century texts, it's spelled Hindu. So there are an estimated about 1 billion Hindu people in the world today. As we mentioned when we're talking about Buddhism, about 80% of the people who identify themselves religiously in India are Buddhists, or Hindus. And there are, of course, an increasing number of Hindu people in the US and in Europe because of immigration. Not a lot of people seem to convert to Hinduism. Does anybody know anyone who's converted to Hinduism? I was thinking about that today. I mean, I know a lot of people have converted to Judaism, who have come to Christianity or Buddhism or Islam, but
Well, I think there are some groups that, of Westerners who are basically doing a Hindu thing.
doing the practice. I mean, yoga.
Well, and I'm talking, not
Okay.
talking about people who do yoga, but, I think the, sister of a friend of mine was involved with a group like that, and,
Who are following Hindu. I'll have to do a little more research on that, because I
Yeah,
just
they
started
were
thinking about
doing-
that today.
they were doing, I mean, they were doing clearly Hindu rituals when
Uh-huh.
she was dying of cancer, and the group
Ah.
was, covering her with flowers, and
Oh, how interesting.
so it was definitely a Hindu
I'll have to
ritual.
research that a little more. That's
Yeah, I could
interesting.
find out what
Yeah, do if
they
you
called-
find out.
What they called it, yeah.
I have some friends in the Indian community here, and they said that there are a lot of people from India who are coming to the U.S. and the Twin Cities. They said their Indian community here is growing rapidly. There's a lot of new Indian people. They have they call it their mission. It's like their temple, and they said it's growing like crazy. So, good for us to know, right? Good for us to know.
That's the IT techs coming in.
Yeah, it's all the IT people. I mean, this is good. This is good,
From the former British Guiana.
We talk to a lot of people from India on the phone, don't we? Every
Yes.
time we call our cell phone company or whatever.
Right.
So we're saying Hinduism, according to tradition, 5,000 years old, right? Now, there are 3 religious traditions that arose from or in the context of Hinduism. We talked about one last week, which is Buddhism, and that was about 500 BCE. Jainism, which may be the last one we talk about. I'm kind of tempted to do a session on Jainism because I like it so much. Jane's nodding. Is it just because your name is Jane?
No.
You want to do Jainism? You think it's named after you?
Heck no. But it's an interesting tradition.
It's a fascinating tradition. So Jainism arose about the same time as Buddhism in India, about 500 BCE. And Sikhism, which is another interesting tradition, the gentleman with the large turbans. Seems like there's a lot of Sikh cab drivers in New York. That's where I've seen the most of them. That arose about 15th century CE. So that's a much newer tradition, but actually Sikhism is a blend of Hinduism and Islam. That's another really interesting tradition to study. Yeah, so anyway, so then we can think about, okay, who is a Hindu? We say it's this amazing, diverse, huge conglomeration. What are the factors that make someone describe themselves as Hindu? Well, number one is acceptance of the sacred writings. Writings are very important within Hinduism. The sacred writings basically are known as the Vedas. You may have heard this term. Ever heard of a Veda? The Vedas are the sacred writings. So anyone who accepts the sacred writings with reverence, takes them seriously, attempts to live out the precepts of the Vedas. Other factors are believing that the means of connecting with that which is greater than us are many. That there are many pathways to what we might in a Christian culture call salvation, but really to having a deepened relationship with the ultimate reality, that the pathways are many. Hinduism is not an evangelistic tradition. They don't ever go out and seek converts, because the idea is it doesn't matter what path you're following, as long as you're following it in truth and living a holy life. You don't need to be a Hindu, okay? So we can contrast that with some of the other traditions that have maybe not as spacious a view of how to have a relationship. Is that a nice way of saying it? Having a relationship with the ultimate reality. There's also a realization of the truth or awareness that the number of deities to be worshipped is large. There are estimates that there are over 300,000 different deities recognized within Hinduism. It's amazing. Some say it might be 1 million. I mean, there's really no way to count it. There are certainly main deities. There are some which are more universally recognized, okay? You go into like an Indian grocery store, an Indian restaurant, do you see oftentimes deities, right? And it can be interesting to ask, what do those represent to you? Probably one is going to represent prosperity, success in business. Our friend Ganesha, if you have a new endeavor, you might have Ganesha included in your group of deities. When we were driving over here, I was telling Diane today that as I was thinking about these deities and how to talk about them, it reminded me of Roman Catholicism. What's the parallel within Roman Catholicism?
Saints.
The saints. I don't know how many saints there are, but there is certainly something. Do you know how many there are? A lot, right?
Very
certainly
much so.
something
They
in
keep coming up with new ones.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, well, Mother
Growing
Teresa.
firmament.
Mother Teresa is there was actually an article in the New York Times yesterday about there was some Hindu kind of a fundamentalist almost that was down, made a speech condemning Mother Teresa.
Oh, there has been a lot of stuff as far as revelations about how she's worried in the suffering of the people she was supposed to help.
Well, this was criticizing her. They said, no, she did, this perspective was she did good work, but that her motive
Exactly.
was not really to help people. Her motive was conversion.
Well, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of like duh. But, the people who revered her, really argued. But that was just yesterday in the paper. But I completely lost my
Oh,
train of
You were
thought.
talking about deities. Do they
Deities,
have-
deities,
do they
yes.
have new deities?
Well, they do, yeah, they do, but also these deities, now, when you talk about the saints each, at least the really ancient ones, have kind of a focus. So there's, there's a lost item, there's kind of a saint that you go to. It used to be the guy you hung in the car, but I think he was a little bit debunked. But there's saints have sort of a specific function or a focus, and it's very much that way with deities, within Hinduism. Now, one of the raps against Hinduism is that it's pagan worship, that these are understood to be God, that they worship these in the place of God. Not true at all. Now, I think I mentioned in one of the early sessions that I had this opportunity to sit down with a Swami about 3 months ago and talk to him, a Hindu teacher. And one of the questions I asked him was, how would you explain this plethora of deities to somebody who's not part of that tradition? And he said the best way to talk about it is that we look at these and we direct energy towards them. We, in a sense, pray toward them. But it's as if we're looking through them. And in looking through them, we see the truth that's beyond. I thought that was just beautiful. Just beautiful. So they're like a lens.
Is there a focus?
Like a focus, but it's not just on that thing itself. It like opens up a greater truth, some greater truth about the world and the nature of the ultimate reality.
And are the deities based on real people that have lived at some time?
Some of them may be, but not really.
I never thought of that.
They're not real. I don't think so. I mean, a lot of the stories do.
There's
and
stories
they-
around them, yeah.
That's right. And there is like Krishna, who's a character who is over and over and over reincarnated, but isn't really like one of the deities per se. But they're symbols, they're metaphors. They're not like saints in that sense, that these were people who actually lived.
Question?
A Swami that I was talking to described it as they are all facets of the jewel of the supreme mystery.
So the facets
And
of the jewel of the
as you
supreme mystery.
focus on
Beautiful.
each one of those, you were looking through that facet to see the heart of the gem.
Oh, isn't that beautiful?
And you can shift and see it from different facets, and it'll look slightly differently, but you're always looking at the heart of the gem. And so each one of these is a facet of the gem of truth.
That's very Kabbalistic,
Yeah, well.
Jewish, it
Given
really.
where we were talking about.
Yep.
But that was one of the explanations that I was given when I was talking.
It's
to a lot
beautiful.
of- I've known a lot of Hindu
Yep.
people.
Yep. Jane.
And it seems to me that would also be kind of like the aspect of Islam where there's the 1,000 names of the deity.
Mm-hmm.
And in Judaism, we also have this tradition where there are different names of the Almighty.
Yep.
Which represent different aspects or facets.
Yeah, exactly. You've got, right over here,
Sure.
you've got the Svirot, chart of the Svirot, and each of those blobs at the bottom
Yeah.
is basically a facet of the divine, an aspect, compassion and judgment and strength and, yeah. Yeah, if anybody ever wants to do a Kabbalah thing, I'd be happy to do that too. So that's just a little bit of the basic characteristics of Hinduism. Now, as we've talked before, there's no human founder. We've kind of got these two categories of founded and not founded. There's no Buddha or Jesus of Nazareth within Hinduism. There's a lot of discussion about how these traditions arose. One of the things that scholars suppose about is that it's a conglomeration of the original indigenous Indian traditions. The indigenous people there were known as Dravidians, and they had an eternal fire, divine fire-based religious tradition. And then there were Aryans, Aryan invaders that came from Iran, kind of overran India, and they brought their own traditions with them. So the thinking is it might be kind of a conglomeration of the Aryan and the Dravidian, and it kind of grew out of that. Now, there's, as I mentioned, the scriptures, the words, the writings are very important within Hinduism. There's a lot of them. Somebody asked me one day, I want to get a copy of the Hindu equivalent of the Bible. And I said, well, there really isn't an equivalent. She said, oh, I know there is. Somebody told me, and was arguing with me. It's like, there really isn't. There are some writings that are more important and more commonly known, but there's no one particular writing. There's two main categories that we can, where's my eraser, that we can talk about. One is called Sruti, and this is kind of the older traditions within Hinduism. And the teaching is that the Shruti texts were heard by wise sages. They were kind of given to them audibly. And we've certainly heard this before, haven't we? How did Muhammad receive the teachings of the Quran? He heard them while he was
And
in a
Moses.
cave. Huh?
And how did
And Moses, up on the mountain, he heard the voice of God. So it's taught that the Shruti texts came audibly and were taught and written down much later, maybe around 1500 BCE, which is still an awful long time ago. That's about the time of the Exodus from Egypt.
So basically, it's oral tradition later recorded.
Have we heard this before?
Constantly?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are these threads of these
Has to
very
do with
old
every
traditions that are told and told and told.
Has to do with history in general.
It is, it's
That's-
so,
That's what religions are.
Yeah.
I mean, all religions, that's one of the characteristics, is they have a history.
Yep.
Yep.
They have an evolving history. And that hopefully continues. They continue to evolve as the world evolves, as our culture evolves. So the Vedas come from this tradition, okay? Those very, very important writings. The second category, and there certainly does not seem to be enough vowels in this word, Smriti texts. And these are explanations of the deeper meaning of the Shruti texts.
Oh, Talmud.
Talmud.
Exactly, exactly. So like Talmud, like Zohar, an exploration, kind of an expansion upon these texts. Now, we have Christianity. There's nothing precisely like that, but the teachings of the early Christian fathers, all are that same kind of thing where you explore these texts. The dogma of the churches, same thing. Exploring the older texts and applying them to life, looking for the deeper meanings. Okay? And these are also very much revered and taken very, very seriously. There's also a category of writings, and we are just skimming the surface of this, I have to tell you, known as the Upanishads. You might have heard of this. This also comes out of the Vedic tradition. And this is a distillation of the philosophies of the Vedas. Hinduism, like Buddhism, is a deeply philosophical set of traditions. Explorations on the meaning of life, on ethics, how people should be in this world. And these are much later, not sure when, but they're a compilation written by different scribes over time and eventually brought together as a unit. One of the most famous writings, and this I think is probably what that person was referring to when she wanted to read the Hindu Bible, was the Bhagavad Gita. And I have actually, I'm going to pass out something here, and this is just a little bit of the Bhagavad Gita. This is a section in a poem, a very long epic poem known as the Mahabharata. And this is the most popular Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita. Every Hindu person knows this and reveres this, and that's what people are familiar with. It was written sometime between 200 BCE and, or 200 BCE and 200 CE. So somewhere right around, the zero-ish year. And it's understood as kind of the culmination of Hindu thought, a series of short chapters, and it's actually in the form of a conversation between Krishna, who I mentioned earlier, as some almost see Krishna as almost like a Jesus figure, but one who is reincarnated
Partied
over,
better. And he partied better. He partied better.
He partied better. He was a fun guy, right? Yeah. So
But
conversation
did he throw tables over?
between Krishna and
That's
Arjuna.
because he was partying, huh?
So, and it's said to be semi-historical, but it's a conversation, very philosophical. Like, for example, I pervade the entire universe in my unmanifested form. All creatures find their existence in me, but I'm not limited by them. Behold my divine mystery. So you can take this and read this at home at your leisure, as I throw it at Martha. And I wonder if I made it up. I think I made, I am good. I made exactly the right number. Also attached to this at the end is a list of terms, Hindu terms, because there are so many terms and they're so unfamiliar that I copied some terms out of a textbook.
I know you did.
So this will just at least give you a little taste of the Bhagavad Gita and of the great writings of Hinduism. And it's really regarded as the last major addition to the collection of Hindu writings, the last important addition. So let's talk about the major themes of Hindu teaching. We could say that at the bottom, it's an exploration of reality. And the goal, in a sense, or this exploration of reality, deals with seeking an understanding of the relationship of the self, of whatever it is we are. What is our relationship to that which is beyond us? What is the nature of that? And what does that mean about what kind of person we are in the world? The nature of the soul and the nature of the divine. Now, these are questions that most religious traditions deal with. Hinduism just has a special focus on this and deals with it in a very deep and philosophical way. So, as we talked before, the figures, the deities are really nothing more than metaphors for this mysterious reality about which we can't say anything because it's beyond our ability to find words for. And also, one of the very important factors within Hinduism is coming to a deeper understanding of the nature of reality and of our relationship through contemplation and meditation and various other sorts of rituals and practices, including, of course, many different forms of yoga. And we'll talk about that later. But you hear echoes of Buddhism and all this, don't you? The meditation, the contemplation, that nature of reality. So you can see that Buddhism definitely arose from this. Some will even describe Buddhism as kind of a reform movement within Hinduism that cleaned away a lot of this, deity stuff and just ended up with a pure philosophy and some of the important practices. But of course, then you take it out to Tibet and different places, and all the deities came back again. But that's one way of looking at Buddhism as kind of a reform movement within Hinduism. So core concepts. Now here's a little bit of a quote from the Upanishads, which can be one way of expressing the goal of Hinduism. Lead me from falsehood to truth, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. So sense of a journey to truth, to light, to immortality. Implying that the place where we start is falsehood, darkness, and death. So this is the journey that Hinduism is geared to help us on. So the themes common are belief in Dharma, seeing the value of Dharma, samsara. I need my eraser. Samsara is the word for reincarnation or rebirth. Very important to the philosophy. The idea that we have many, 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 many lifetimes. Lifetimes beyond count. Those lifetimes are not all human. Kind of depends on the karma. We talked about that last week, that you bring with you from this life to the next. If you bring with you good karma, if your soul has an imprint of positive actions, of living according to the Dharma, you will be in your next incarnation at a higher level of consciousness. You may be in human form, but you'll be born at a higher level of consciousness. You've heard the term, that person's an old soul. Okay?
What does it mean if you come back in non-human form? I mean, is that considered?
It means you didn't do so well this time around.
Unless it's a
There's something you need to learn. It's an opportunity.
In other words, you don't want to come back as a cockroach.
I don't think so. I personally wouldn't want to.
There is exceptions to that. Some of the animals were considered a higher.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when you
Turtles
talk
and
lower,
certain
you're
elephants.
talking about even like
Turtles and
rocks.
elephants,
Yeah, I was
White
gonna s-
elephants,
Oh, elephants, I mean, cows.
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 I mean, there's not any bias necessarily towards humans being the epitome.
I heard an interesting, I have a friend who's a monk, and she talked about one of their beliefs, that you can come back, and they said, what does somebody come back who's really evil? Hitler. He would come back as a rock.
Mm-hmm,
Rocks cannot change.
mm-hmm. They're very slow creatures. They're very slow creatures.
They
Yep.
have lots of time to learn.
Lots of time to learn, that's right, that's right. A lot of time to contemplate, right? But there is the idea that vegetation, humans are all subject to Dharma. Every life form, every type of thing in the natural world is subject to Dharma, is subject to this truth and this cycle. So interesting. I mean, there's such a deep sense of interconnectedness. And we tend to live in this world where human beings are the epitome, and it's our job to do as we wish with other life forms. But that's definitely a Western perspective rather than an Eastern perspective. There are a variety of paths within Hinduism that people can devote themselves to. And some of it is based on, it's kind of a brilliant system because I had one teacher who said there's a type of Hinduism for each different personality type. So those who are more geared toward action, there's a path within Hinduism that is more geared toward doing, being out in the world doing, and that's more like a karmic, like action-oriented thing. There's one known as Bhakti path, which is devotion. more like worshipful, kind of a quiet, worshipful type path. Jnana is for those who like to use their heads. That's study, growing in awareness, learning. So there's different, in fact, Carl Jung, who was someone I've studied a lot and use in my counseling work, he was very much influenced by the teachings of Hinduism in the development of his personality types. Has anyone ever taken the Myers-Briggs personality type analysis, which comes out of Jung's work, which comes out of the Hindu teaching of really what could be seen as different personality types? Isn't that interesting? Carl Jung is so interesting. If you haven't done your Myers-Briggs type, you should. Has anybody not done that? Who's done their Myers-Briggs type? Everybody here. That's awesome.
Can't live in this country and not.
Oh, they're surprising. You'd be surprised. The people I talk to, it's like, what's that? I've never heard of that. How many are introverts? If you don't mind me asking. Extroverts?
I run right down the middle.
Do you run down the middle? Yeah, I used to be a raging extrovert, but I'm going more towards the middle.
We did it at our church.
Steve remembers me from high school. I had a lot of fun in high school. Anyway, so as we said, the cycle of rebirth is samsara. And the outcome of this, the ultimate, when one is liberated from this cycle, is known as moksha. Now, you don't necessarily need to remember these terms, but I think it's kind of, I'm losing my ability to think and write. Let's try that again. These kind of, you run across these terms, you know, you've heard them, okay, that's the Hindu term for the ultimate freedom, the ultimate liberation from this very long cycle of death and rebirth. It's said that some of the great teachers do remember their path, as we talked about with Buddha last night, that they do remember their past incarnations. I actually had a Jewish teacher, the wonderful rabbi from whom I got my rabbinical ordination, who was a wise man who actually remembered his incarnations, previous incarnations, and told me about one of mine, which he didn't usually do. So I think that is something that is very possible. The soul is called Atman, and this is where the karma is laid down. And there's no, I don't think, any good way of talking about it, but it's this imprint of the actions. Now, if we do talk about Jainism, there's a teaching within Jainism that says your soul is like a lens, is like a transmitter of light, in a way. That's where the light of the divine has a potential for shining through. And whenever we do actions which are impure, which are unkind or harmful or cruel, it dirties their soul. It leaves, they believe, actually like little, almost like particles on the soul, which dims the ability of the soul to transmit this light into the world. So their goal is to lead lives that are pure and clean, so their soul can be a more pure reflector or transmitter of that light. And that's kind of similar to the idea that our deeds leave an imprint, for better or worse, on our soul.
It makes me think of the teachings of Musar. Of
The Musar?
The Musar teachings, at least as Alan Marinus talks about them.
You want to say just a little bit about Musar teachings for those who don't?
Musar is a tradition within Judaism. It's sometimes talked about as ethical teachings, but it basically is as a program for improving your character, for changing so that your changing your basic personality traits so that it will be more in line with being holy.
Yeah, it's like a path to holiness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like a prescribed path to holiness. Yep. Yep. Like there's like the rule of Saint Benedict. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that within Catholicism. I work for the Benedictines now. So I was given a copy of the Rule of Saint Benedict. Perfect, you know?
Yeah.
Just what I need. But it's interesting. So the nature of God. One of the terms that Hinduism uses for this ultimate reality, and you may have heard of this term, is Brahman. And this is just a designation for that which encompasses everything. Hinduism is what we would call, has anyone ever heard the term panentheistic? Mm-hmm. So a panentheistic tradition says that this ultimate reality is everywhere and part of everything. There is no place that Brahman is not. There's no up there is God and down here is us. It's just the unifying principle might be one way of talking about Brahman. Just the everywhereness, the ultimate truth. Another image of God that's very common within, another name that's used for this ultimate reality is Ishavira, which is more the creator type image, the active principle of this divine reality, that which does something. So Ishavira and Brahman are the two most common terms applied to this cosmic spirit. And as we said before, the deities are to enable the devotee to look through it and maybe catch just a glimpse or a slight understanding or connection with this ultimate reality. Now there's three major philosophical systems in Hinduism. They all share roots in the Vedas. They all have a focus on meditation, direct experience of this reality through meditation, as well as ethics. But I'm not going to get into a lot of detail of these three different philosophical systems. I think it's just too much. But the one that we're going to talk about, the third philosophical system, is yoga. The first is called Samkhya, that's the oldest, and it talks about kind of a dualistic reality, blah, blah, blah. The second is Advaita Vedanta, which talks about everything being one reality, just kind of a different view of eternity. There the material world is seen as completely an illusion. Whatever we have here is just complete illusion, like a wave on the ocean. Is a wave on the ocean anything? It's energy passing through a substance. And that's the way they see material reality, as just a wave of energy passing through matter. That's kind of an interesting perspective when you think about it, because that's kind of what we are. It's sort of, yeah, there's a thought for the day. But yoga, now most people know what yoga is. I can go to my health club just about any day and go to a yoga class, right? So the goals of yoga at LA Fitness are what? Exercise, strength, balance, relaxation. But it's not about connecting with the ultimate reality, is it? Now, I think it's just beautiful that people find all kinds of useful help for their bodies through yoga, but that obviously was not the original intent, isn't the original intent of yoga within Hinduism as one of the three main philosophical systems. It's really one of the many forms of spiritual discipline, and the goal of them is self-knowledge. It's ways of controlling your body, leading to self-knowledge, very much as meditation seeks to control the mind. I mean, you hear stories of what great yogis can do with their bodies. I mean, there's stories that they can actually levitate. And I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of the just incredible physical positions that some of these individuals with their heads, feet behind their heads, I mean, it just looks completely impossible. But that's through the conditioning of the body and the mind. It's quite remarkable. So the goal of yoga is known as samhati, which is union with the ultimate reality. So that's the goal. Everything else is a byproduct. But this union is what it's all about and why it's practiced within Hinduism. And the practices are geared, I mean, you think about these developed over time, it's really pretty interesting. They're geared toward achieving balance. I mean, that's quite obvious, isn't it, when you do yoga postures, balance. Also purity. Now there is certainly even in the popular forms of yoga teaching that your body will be cleansed when you do yoga, that it moves your systems within your body. And there's many different systems of yoga within Hinduism. Very many different kinds with slightly different goals. But just so you know, next time somebody asks you, the word yoga comes from the same root as the word yoke. To be yoked. To be, what does that mean? To be bound, to be committed. You know, you take on the yoke. I've heard that I think in Christian traditions and in Judaism too, there's this idea of the yoke. Taking on that union, in a sense. I mean, when an oxen is yoked, it's brought into union with its purpose. Think about that. So that's the idea behind yoga. And we're not going to talk about all the different kinds of yoga, but what we're going to talk about is the path that is common to yoga and to other teachings within Hinduism. And the path, and this is not too different from what you heard in Buddhism, the path begins with what's known as 5 abstentions. And this is now getting into the ethical dimensions of yoga. You should abstain from injuring anyone, anything. You should abstain from lying, stealing, sensuality, and greed. Good advice, right? You can't go wrong with that. Then there are the 5 observances, which is cleanliness. Now, I don't see cleanliness in the 10 Commandments anywhere. But there is that idea that there's an order. I mean, it's very coherent with the teachings that there's this, in cleanliness there's an order. In yoga there's an order. In all of this there's a sense of order and balance. So cleanliness, contentment. We should be content with what we have. Self-discipline. Desire to reach a goal, like determination, studiousness. None of this stuff is easy. I mean, I think anybody who imagines that the path of Hinduism is easy, it's not. It takes a great deal of devotion to actually follow this path, and whether it's yoga or any of the other philosophical practices. And contemplation of the divine through these physical postures and through meditation. Next important thing is physical conditioning, okay? Working through the body to the mind. So as you get your body under control, so then your mind will be under control. Think there's any truth to that? I think so.
Runner's high.
Huh?
Runner's high.
Runner's high, but just the discipline of following, I don't know how many of you follow some kind of an exercise discipline, but it takes some determination to stick to that. And having that kind of determination and discipline can lead to discipline in other areas of your life. Same thing of having like a meditative practice, which at certain times in my life I've been very disciplined about, and other times I have not been as disciplined about. But I know that when I am disciplined about exercise and disciplined about meditation and careful about what I eat, I feel better. I function at a higher level. Feel better about myself, and better able to connect with other people in a healthy way. Physical conditioning also keeps the body from distracting the mind while it concentrates. So if your body is healthy and in good condition, it's going to be easier for you to sit in meditative poses for long periods of time, right? Sometimes I read about these meditation workshops and such where they'll be sitting for an hour in meditation. Oh, I don't think I could do that. But what great discipline that would be. I don't know. But it's one of the fun things I've read about the poses for meditation is that there's an attempt to keep the body in a balance between comfort and discomfort. You don't want to be too uncomfortable because then you'll be distracted from your meditation, and you don't want to be too comfortable because what happens then? That's right. You'll be having a nap instead of a meditation session. So I guess that there's some sense to the fact that you don't want to be too comfortable. Hindu texts describe 84 different poses, but only 5 are considered important for meditation, I guess. But the lotus, traditionally, the lotus position of meditation, which you're all familiar with, is done ideally on a tiger skin. Well, sitting on a tiger skin, covered by a deer skin. So what would the tiger skin represent? Energy. What would the deer skin represent?
Peacefulness.
Calm. Nice deer. So it was kind of this combination of the tiger energy and the deer energy. But now I get back to this idea that we shouldn't be harmful to anything. Where did the tiger skin come from? That's what I want to
Oh, that old tiger that died out.
a tiger died of old age. The skin maybe doesn't look so good, but you cover it with a deer skin, it'll be fine. Right? Oh, we were talking about
There aren't enough
paradox.
tigers around for
Yeah,
everybody who wants to.
I think there used to be a lot of tigers in
Yeah,
India. I mean,
probably.
tiger
Yeah.
hunting was a big hoo-ha there. Unfortunately, there aren't probably any left.
Where does the caste system come in?
Oh, we're gonna talk about that in a minute. Good question, caste system. Yep, that's one of the things. Oh my gosh. Breath control. We know about how important breath control is in meditation and yoga. Another thing where if you can control your breath, you can control your body, you can control your mind. So it's a lot of control here. And some of this kind of goes against our sort of American Western idea that, we should be free and not controlled. But there's another idea of sense control. And the way Gandhi put this was you turn the spotlight inward. So when you're meditating, you attempt to not be distracted by your senses. Instead of looking out, you turn the energy in. Actually understand what that means, I think. All right.
Can you talk about the third eye?
Yeah, the third eye. It's actually looking through that and turning that in through the third eye, which is really, you can't really explain. Anyway, we're going to talk about now something known as the 4 pursuits of life, the 4 stages of life, and the 4 classes of society. Okay? These are kind of important basic perspectives, major aspects of Hindu Dharma. So the 4 pursuits of life. It's said that all creatures, not only human beings, seek for things. And all of these are okay in balance in their own place. Number one is pleasure. Hinduism says it's okay to seek pleasure. It's okay. Physical pleasure is okay as long as it's controlled and held in balance. There's the Kama Sutra. What's that about?
Sexual pleasure.
It's about sexual pleasure. That's right. It's about maximizing sexual pleasure. So that's a good thing, as long as it's done in the right manner and held in balance with all other things. So pleasure, material wealth is also one of the pursuits of life, and it's okay to pursue material wealth, again, as long as it's done in an appropriate manner, in a balanced manner. Now, the goal, really, pursuit of life, is happiness, which is higher than sensuality or material, although those are okay too. Happiness, and the highest goal is samsara. Okay, so the highest pursuit in life is pursuing samsara, the escape from this cycle of rebirth, okay? So you kind of have the physical, the material, the emotional, and the spiritual.
It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
It is exactly, I
Yeah.
assume that's where this came from,
Yeah.
really. That those are, but they're all, I mean, one of the things I like about Hinduism, they're saying, these are all okay. They're all important and appropriate parts of life. It's only if you get stuck in the sensual pursuits or the material pursuits and you never move beyond those. You never open yourselves up to the higher pursuits. Now, this gets into the 4 stages of life. It's said that the first quarter of one's life should be spent in study. It's the student stage of life. Now, you say quarters of life, it kind of depends on how old you grow to be, you know what I'm saying? When this was taught, you probably didn't live to be 100. But the first stage is the study. And now listen to this. How does this describe your average teenager? Celibate, controlled, sober, involved in pure contemplation. Does that sound like your average teenager?
Sounds like the other end of the spectrum.
It does sound like the other end of the
Not in
spectrum.
this culture.
Not in this culture.
No.
But that was the ideal, that as this young person is developing, they should really develop the necessary discipline as a foundation for life. Okay? Now, I don't think any of us have teenagers anymore, but
Yeah.
you do. Peggy has a grandson. I want you to tell Jax, this is what
I
it's
don't
like.
know if I necessarily buy into that though, because there's something to be said for these children that have grown and been studious and sound and so on, sow their wild oats later in life, which is a lot harder.
Well, I think if this is a broad cultural expectation, and the expectation is you would move from this stage to what's known as a householder stage. You'd get married, you'd get your education, you'd get your learning, and then you would become married. You would have a family, you'd be responsible, you'd be focused on the material aspects of life, and then you would have your physical experience of love and, within the proper context of this relationship. And this is the pursuit of life. This is when you're kind of building yourself up materially. The third stage of life is when you've raised your family, you've kind of done the business that you need to do in life, and you gradually begin disengaging from the material pursuits of life. You turn your business over to your kids. I mean, this was the way in the past, right? But you begin gradually disengaging from the material aspects of life. Maybe you partially retire, or you move your work to half-time, so you can start, I say this because I just did that, so you can begin focusing on other pursuits, of life. But the fourth stage is the total moving away from the material aspects of life. The fourth stage of life is seen to be the most spiritual. That's when you really start focusing on your karma, on more intense meditation, more concentration. In the past, there would be individuals who would leave home at this stage of life and either just become wandering monk types or go to live in the forest, so that they end this life in the holiest possible place.
You know, if you think in the Hindu family system, when families, generations live together, it's a slightly different context. I mean, this fits in that context. The fact that you're the active patriarch, and then as your children grow and they have families, you're still in the family home, but you withdraw from that dominant role.
Yeah, you don't have to be in that role anymore, and then you can, and it's, what I love about it is, I work with a lot of old people in my work. I have for years. You work in hospice or spiritual care, you work with a lot of old people. And one of the biggest problems for elderly people is feeling like they don't have any purpose in life. Once they have, their kids are raised and they don't have work anymore. It's like, what do? I sit and watch TV all day.
Well, that's one of the defects of American culture, so to speak.
So what if our,
The
what
youth
if,
focus, the youth orientation, and there is no longer a place in many, not all, but many communities for wisdom or for the crone or for the you know.
that's right, to see the end of life as the most important part of life.
Is exactly the opposite of
It's
American
the opposite,
society.
that's exactly right. To look at it as, and this is not only us looking at older people, but older people looking at themselves. To say, this is an important time in my life. I'm gonna be moving on to the next stage in my journey pretty soon. This is my opportunity to grow spiritually and look back on my life and see, you know, where I can make reparations and do healing. And I just think it's such a beautiful, beautiful way to end one's life. I don't know how we spread that idea, but maybe we just can take that for ourselves and think about it when our time comes, right? Because that brings meaning. That brings meaning to that stage of life. Very, very significant. I don't know if we need to go live in the forest, but you never know. So let's just talk a little bit about the caste system, because that is something that also comes out of the Hindu Dharma. That there are properly 4 classes within society. Initially, it was based on profession. So what your pursuit in life was. We've got the Brahmins, which is not the same as Brahman the god, but very close term. So the Brahmins were the teachers and the priests. So now you think about this. What's the highest caste in our society today? Is it the teachers and the clergy?
No.
Are we the highest paid people? You know, it's like, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so. The second was the, like the warriors, the kings, the administrators. So the political people, the military people, those who run, you know,
Society.
government offices and stuff. That was the second highest caste. The third are the farmers, herders, merchants, business type people. Gandhi's family comes from that caste. He's not the lowest, not the highest, but he comes from the merchant caste. And then, of course, we have the lowest caste, who are the servants and the laborers.
What about the untouchables?
Well, that comes from the lowest.
That's the lowest of the low.
The lowest of the low. I mean, even
Right.
within the lowest caste, there are those who are Dalits, the real untouchables.
Yeah.
I mean, literally. When we say that person is an outcast, where do you think that comes from? You know, just those who are not even worthy of consideration. Now, this has been fought against in India. It still exists to some degree. but my understanding is that it's better than it used to be. One of those who really opposed this was, of course, Gandhi, one of the greatest leaders, at least in relative modern day India, who was known as Mahatma, means great soul. He was just looked at as someone who was probably in a very high place of reincarnational status, who came here to teach and to bring ideas to the world, and he did. I mean, his teaching of nonviolent protest influenced, who did he influence in the US? Martin Luther King. Nelson Mandela was a student of Gandhi. John Lennon, for heaven's sakes. Now, he managed through this, you know, the British are not in India anymore. I don't know, maybe we could use a little more of this in the world today.
I don't know how well it would work with ISIS.
How would it work with ISIS, you know, I mean, but he was willing, he said if you have to be killed for your beliefs, it's not in your karma.
Actually, there was a thing in the paper today, said if all the money we spent on military weapons and fighting, if we put that into schools and hospitals and rebuilding this, you know, providing for the people of those countries, ISIS might not be there.
I'd like to try it. I'm a pretty much of a pacifist.
Yeah, the same thing they said when Saddam was there. If, instead of boycotting the country and putting all these restrictions, trade with them, because with more influence, people are less susceptible to the control of a dictator.
Educate women.
Yeah, we can't let go, we can't do that. I do think it would be powerful.
I think it would be too, but I can't.
I don't know about that.
Huh?
The joke in the sixties on how to combat communism, drugs, sex, and rock and roll.
There
And it
you go.
worked.
If we could just broadcast enough rock and roll across the Iron Curtain,
And
Yeah,
it worked,
you got
didn't
it.
it?
and the Beatles play.
Isn't that something? I think we've lost something. Maybe someday we'll go back to it. I don't know. I mean, Gandhi lived also a life of great simplicity. I think we can
The
learn
question I
something
would
from that
have
as
about
well.
the caste system is, at some point, there must have been a reason why it evolved. There must have been a positive impetus for it, but what was that?
Well, I think we see that in a lot of cultures. You know, there were the serfs and there were the, you know, I think that societies tended to be structured and hierarchical, and this was simply a codified.
We have it here, we have the 1% of the rest of us, and
Mhm.
then those that are considered trailer trash.
But there it was codified and, you know, laid down in a program, and it was hereditary, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it worked as a social control mechanism, because
Yes,
if you really were a good person at whatever case you were in, then you would be reincarnated at a higher case.
Well, that's right, and it was not really looked at. I mean, maybe people, if I was an untouchable, I probably wouldn't look at it this way, but when you look at karma and samsara, if I am born in a low caste, that's where I'm supposed to be in this lifetime. If, you know?
Part of the reason the caste system developed, if you look at, it was based on jobs, as you said.
Right, profession, yep.
And the caste system, what each caste did was progressively more and more in opposition and violation of the other precepts. So that
Picking up dead bodies
you were supposed to
and.
do no harm, you were supposed to do all this, but somebody had to grow the food, someone had to slaughter the animals, somebody had to do all this stuff. But by doing that, you were damaging your karma. But somebody still had to do it to make it work. So by succeeding at what they're doing and making everybody be able to live, but it deliberately put them in a position where they could not reach the highest levels. So their caste, by their professions, put them into that. Then there was people who had to clean up off of all of this stuff, and that put them in an even lower caste, because that put them in an even more precarious position to be able to cycle
They were
forward.
polluted in a
So,
sense.
more
But they were
polluted.
there for a reason in
But
this lifetime.
part of it is because you have to start somewhere on the wheel of life,
Mhm.
And if you start someone who is fresh and new, doing stuff that's going to do this, then as you work through these trials, so to speak, you are able to then jump to, by excelling in that cast and being able to do it really, really well, you would be able to jump to the next.
And I think there's also then the idea that you need to accept where you're born in this life.
Because you were doing a whole world
Contentment.
of service.
That's right. That's the idea of contentment, that, yeah, I am serving according to my
Place in life.
my place, that's
Karma
right.
from my last lifetime, so.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's something
Yeah.
rather compelling about that, isn't
But
there? I know a lot of
Rebel
people
here
think
says,
that's
of
oppressive.
course, it's interesting to note that the priests were in the highest class and the government was in the second class.
Mhm.
And the priests would have to keep the military happy so that they wouldn't overthrow them.
Yes.
And it was to the advantage of the priests and the people in the Brahmin class that everybody else would be brainwashed into thinking that that was their place in life, so that, oh, say, the military
Well, there
would not
is that argument that it
rise
was
up
of
in arms.
control
But then again, you
brainwashing.
know, I come from labor roots.
Well, there is you know, that this whole thing is just a way of controlling the masses.
Exactly.
I mean, you can look at it that way too. Take your pick, really. I mean, maybe both, there's some
The
truth to both.
paradox.
A paradox, that's right. We're
It
talking
had to
about
be a-
paradox.
Well, it's a belief system that would make for a stable society.
Yeah, there is, and, you know, and to say, be content with what you have. Well, I think we can say thank you for tonight, and